Hi, today we're going to talk about how to draw a portrait, specifically how to draw a self-portrait. A self-portrait is fairly straightforward. You need to be able to do a few things, and this is kind of important. You need to be able to sit really still and return to the same pose again and again and again. You need to be able to draw a little bit quickly, at least at first. And you're going to need a mirror that you can sit in front of comfortably for a long time. So I've got one of these ones on the desk, and hopefully that's going to give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm seeing as I'm working. So on this camera, you get to see what I'm seeing with my eyes, and on this camera right here, you get to see what I'm drawing as a result of what I'm looking at. The first thing I want to do is I want to get into a position that I can hold. And that's going to be really important, because if you try to get into a position and if it's at all uncomfortable, what's going to happen is your body's going to move because your body wants to be comfortable. When that happens, what you're looking at is going to change. So as that changes, your drawing is going to have to shift, and that means you might have to make a lot of changes on your drawing, and it'll take longer, and it might not look right. So first, let's get into position. Generally, when you're doing a self-portrait like this, it's a good idea to try to get into a 3/4 pose. If you have two mirrors, you can start messing around with profiles in very interesting positions like that, such as this one. But for the most part, you want to get a 3/4 pose because it's a chance for you to show off many different seeing and looking skills. So what I want to do is get that pose, and 3/4, by the way, means that you can see one of your ears and both of your eyes. That's basically what 3/4 means. Getting into position, and like this. I like this pose because you can see that there's a kind of asymmetry between my shoulders. There's an angle to my head. And all these things are going to give the composition a bit of a more dynamic look to it. That means that the composition looks more interesting, it's more engaging, because it's not just balanced and level up and down. So what I want to do first is I want to kind of look at my face and figure out what the up and down angles are that I'm seeing. So maybe going from like the top of my head here to the bottom of my chin there, what is that angle that I'm seeing? It's something like this. So I know that the top of my head is here, and maybe let's put my chin somewhere like here. And along this line, I can start to figure out where the rest of that facial anatomy is. And again, I need to really be careful to make sure that my head is returning to the same position every time I look at the mirror. And this is a part where if you can quickly get a few landmarks down, that's what you can look for to turn your head to kind of meet those same points. So for example, if I look at the things that are sticking out left and right the most, I see this ear is pretty much always the farthest thing on my left, and this eye right here, or maybe actually the edge of my glasses here, is the farthest thing on my right. So if I can kind of get those into a certain position and line them up with something, that's going to help me to always get my head back to the same place. So again, I'm measuring, I want to find out what is the angle between the top of my head and the outermost part of my ear here. I'm going to go ahead and look at it. I might measure it like this with my pencil. This is something that's going to take some time. You cannot do this drawing in 10 minutes. starting out with structural lines. The way I'm sitting right now, I'm looking down at my paper at an angle. You want to make it so that as much as possible you're looking perpendicular to your paper, and that's why in many cases you see artists holding their drawings upright or working at something called a drafting table, which I actually have here in the classroom. And that's so that you get a better angle on your drawing like this. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to work sort of on a flat surface that's in front of me. Not ideal, but that's how it's got to be. Anyway, I've triangulated this portion, this point here, and that's going to be the outer limit of my ear. That's my left ear, which you might be seeing on my right because you're looking at me in the mirror. Is that right? I don't know. Don't worry about it. So I have the outer part of my ear here. I've sketched in around that point just to kind of give myself a reminder of what that represents. With the curvature of your head, it's really important to kind of find these general straight areas that you can go between to figure out how those shapes are working. And then you can curve them off. Because your head's not going to be a perfect semicircle. It's going to have changes in the way that the angles of the curves behave. There's a line coming straight across representing kind of the top of my ear and across my eyes. Like that. And in my glasses, I'm seeing a distortion right here, where the lenses are bending light, and it looks like what's behind them is smaller than it really is. So I'm going to ignore that for now and just kind of continue beyond the edge of my glasses. If you wear glasses, you can do the same thing. You will come back to it though. I do want you to draw what you see, even with the distortion of your eyeglasses lenses. So what starts to develop is a head shape. Again, I'm not really drawing curved lines yet. I'm still just drawing kind of straight lines that represent the behavior overall of the extent of my head. Very important always to draw shoulders when you're drawing a portrait. Don't ever just stop at the head, because what you don't want to do is have a head that's just floating in space. That looks strange. So now we've gotten some of the basic anatomy. What I want you to do is to measure, to figure out whether or not your eyes and the top of your ear line up. This is something that's not always going to happen. For example, if you go like this, you won't get a straight line going between your two eyes and your ear. And if you go like this, you'll also see that it doesn't line up correctly. So this only happens at a certain angle. It's a rule that sometimes people teach in drawing, and it can be very unhelpful if you don't also include that note about the angle of the head. And actually, I kind of like having my head up like this for the portrait, so I'm actually going to change what I'm doing at this point. I'm going to grab an eraser. And I kind of like having my head up like this. I think that's also something that will make this more interesting. So I'm actually going to erase a lot of what I've done so far. And this is something that you should feel pretty comfortable doing. A lot of drawing is about correcting and erasing, just like a lot of writing is about editing, right? So it's a similar principle. Paper's going to look like a mess, and that's okay. So let's start again. We still have a pretty similar angle on the face. Kind of like that. Only this time, I'm seeing more of like a direct point. Now what I can do is, I'm more or less head on to the mirror, and I can actually start using the edges of the mirror as a way of seeing what those angles are. So, like that for the upper edge of my head. See how it comes down. And you don't have to do the whole head to begin with, but I do recommend it because that way you're working from big to small and you're kind of subdividing space rather than adding on to space. So right here in the middle, between these 2 points, that's where this part of my nose is, right there, above this nostril. So I want to make sure I indicate that. And we will get into how to draw noses and things like that later. Now it's just a lot of observing and making little marks to record what I'm seeing. I'm starting with big shapes, so like here's the shape of my forehead. And if you can hold your head in the position that you're drawing in, that's even better. But I realize it's not easy to do. Even I am struggling with it. Wearing glasses, actually, you get a kind of an advantage because they frame different parts of the face in a way that make it very easy to record. Oh, I think I lost my pose there for a second. Did it again. As soon as I start looking down, my head moves like this and I lose the pose. So it's important to really make an effort to not move. The problem is now when I look down, you can see what my eyes are doing. I have to do this, and that's more of a strain on my eyeballs. I also don't see the drawing as well when I'm looking at it from this angle, which is why my head wants to do that. So that's why it's important to kind of set up your drawing in a way that it's easy to look at no matter how you're posed. So maybe worry more about having to strain your eyes to see the mirror, depending on how much time you're going to be spending between the two. Normally when you're drawing from observation, this is a really important thing, you're actually going to be spending most of your time looking at the subject and only a much smaller amount of the time looking down at your paper. So it's about 80% to 20% because most of the time you should be just kind of studying visually what you're doing. And nothing is getting carved in stone yet. Everything is still pretty loose while I figure out where everything should be. Kind of like this mouth open a little bit. Makes it look like I'm in the middle of talking. Somebody needs a shave. You can see I've already started doing some observed lines, particularly with the hairline of my beard. And that's just because there's no other way to really express this. I can't do this with straight lines. It wouldn't tell me anything. Maybe let's do one eyebrow up like this. What does that look like? So now I can actually use my glasses to figure out where my eyes are. For eyes, what you want to do is start with the top lid. And as quickly as possible, try and get the shape of that iris. And if you draw this much for an eye, you pretty much express the whole thing as much as you need to. And everything you do from that point on is just detail. I will make a different video, maybe specifically detailing facial features and how to draw them. I know I've made them in the past, and I want to kind of always be improving those videos for you so that you get the best possible sense of how to do this stuff. Real quick, I'm going to break my pose and I'm going to look at my drawing because I want to make sure that I'm not missing any important details here. I think my nose is possibly... No, it's in the right place. Possibly too small though. Yeah, it should be lining up with there. Again, I've drawn a vertical line from here and from here to figure out where the edges of my nose should be. And there aren't really any super dark marks yet. Everything here is very sketchy, very light. I'm probably pretty soon going to start adding in those darker observed lines, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay, now I think we're kind of getting ready. move that ear down a little bit. Maybe not that far. Okay, so I want to make the process of drawing those heavy observed lines and shading kind of into one thought, so that all my lines are talking about value and darkness and lightness and shadows and highlights, and so that when I do start shading, everything's going to be kind of like at the right dynamic level. Okay, so I want to start with just squinting at myself and figuring out where are the darkest parts of this drawing. Where should they be? And what I'm seeing is this. Basically right here between the eyes, like in the inner part on either side of the nose, and of course the beard. And then of course the kind of the outer edges of the hair a little bit. So that's, if I'm going to put down dark lines, it's going to be there. Eyelids tend to cast very dark shadows. I'm actually going to ignore my glasses for now, because those might need to change at some point. Nostrils tend to gather a lot of light. And again, please do watch those videos about how to draw noses, things like that. To the corners of the mouth. All right, beard time. This is gonna be fun. Obviously, I can kind of relax my face while I'm working on this part because it doesn't require me to hold the pose with the rest of my face. But I do want to try and a little bit hold the pose with just my neck so that I get the right lighting on my beard. Okay. Next are going to come eyebrows, I think. Also a fun feature for me. Now I think is the right time to give a suggestion of those eyeglasses. Carefully studying the shape and where they are. And always making sure we're giving enough attention to the eyes. Eyes are interesting. They don't require much, but they require a lot of sensitivity. You don't have to do a lot. You don't have to add a ton of detail, but you have to get it right. Let's do this one. There we go. It's starting to look like me. It's kind of a magical thing when it does happen. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, goodness, it's fun. Can do a kind of a suggestion of shading. It doesn't have to be super fancy, but what you want to do is just make sure that where it's supposed to be dark, it's dark, and where it's supposed to be lighter, it is lighter, and that's all that really matters for this assignment. Let's finish that ear. Don't let it get away. Ears have a kind of predictable anatomy to them most of the time, not always. And if you just make it into this kind of, here we go, landscape of light and darks, most of the time you're going to be just fine with that. Darken the whole thing a little bit. Okay, how are we doing? So because of the angle that I'm working at, what happened was the bottom of my head became a little bit too small compared to the top. So if I were to hold it like this, probably you'd see something a little bit more accurate than this, right? And that's to compensate for the angle at which I'm actually looking at the drawing as I'm working on it. And that's why it's important to get that kind of perpendicular angle to your face while you're working. Do not need a ton of detail on the clothing, but this is what's called a bust. So you've got head and shoulders. And it looks very nice and very finished. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, one thing I could probably do to fix it is to just kind of make the whole top a bit smaller to compensate for that angle problem. Again, I want to be sure to get the correct angle. There we go. Voila. A nice sketch portrait, self-portrait. And I think if you do something like this, it will be more than enough to convince a panel of high school admissions people to take a shot on you, take a chance. You're going to have to do more than one because this is hard and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to want to try again and again and again because you have a lot of motivation to get it right. There we go. A little bit like the guy in Chernobyl. Okay. Thanks for watching. There is my portrait.